I knew the second he said get off the property that it was going to be one of those days where somebody learns the hard way. He stood in the middle of the freshly polished network operations center, arms folded like he was about to command a space launch, not a logistics hub. The place was humming, screens, panels, fiber blinking like Christmas, but underneath that glow, I could already hear it ticking. He didn't build this place. He didn't even understand what he was inheriting. And yet there he was, puffed up chest and some $200 haircut trying to command silence like he'd earned it. "Give me the control server password and get off the property," he said, smug as an overcooked steak, while two guys from private security stepped up like they thought I'd make a run for it. The taller one had that look, half apology, half paycheck. I didn't blink, just reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, pulled out the brass key to rack C7 and placed it in the boy king's hand like I was handing over a loaded gun. Which, in a way, I was. "You've got 2 hours," I said. "After that, this place turns into a $4 million light show with no power behind it." Before we go any further, I need to ask you something real quick. If you've made it this far into the story and you're even a little curious about what happens next, do me a favor, hit subscribe and like the video. 97% of people listen and never subscribe, and yeah, we notice it keeps the stories coming. Thanks. Now, back to the train wreck in progress. My departure was logged at 08:02 exactly. I remember because I looked straight into the security camera as I walked out, slow and steady, not a single glance back. The little red light on the badge reader blinked once as the door locked behind me. I could almost feel the seal tighten, the final shift from builder to outsider, except I didn't leave anything behind that wasn't already on a timer. What that smug little nepotism nugget didn't know was this. The rack key he held like it meant something was about as useful as a spoon at a gunfight. You don't control a system like ours with metal and magnets. You control it with routines, layered access, and legacy logic no fresh out of NBA punk even knows to ask about. He'd taken the crown, sure, but he hadn't earned the map, and he definitely didn't see the mines. The worst part? It wasn't even personal. Not until he made it personal. I'd spent 12 years building operational redundancy that could survive a fire, a ransomware attack, even a full hardware blackout. But there was one thing it was never meant to survive: ignorance with a badge. He stripped me of access like it was just another checkbox in his corporate reorg playbook. Didn't bother to ask what I'd architected, what lived behind the shiny UI his designers slapped over my systems. Thought he could swagger into a command center, throw out the only person who knew how the gears turned, and run the show from a conference call with his fraternity buddy from Stanford. The silence in that elevator ride down was deafening. No one said a word, not the guards, not the front desk clerk who suddenly couldn't meet my eye. They knew. Maybe not the full story, but enough to feel the tension wrap around their throats like a silk noose. I didn't bother stopping at my locker. I had everything I needed. Or rather, everything they didn't. Outside, the air was cool and smug, like it hadn't caught up to the disaster brewing upstairs. I sat in my car for a moment and tapped my phone twice. That was it. 2 taps, one to activate the dormant Cascade protocol, the other to send a time-stamped copy of my final system exit log to legal. Not because I was planning to sue. I didn't need to. I just wanted a copy for the record. Failsafe.init02h. That's what I'd called it. Not flashy, not clever, just clear. The heartbeat demon would keep everything running for exactly 120 minutes after my last biometric sync. No thumbprint, no continuity, no control. And he sure as hell didn't have my thumbprint. I leaned back in the seat and watched the building through the rearview mirror, lights still glowing, people still sipping catered lattes inside his shiny command center. They had no idea, not yet, but they would. I'd given them everything they asked for. What they didn't realize was everything they needed walked out the door at 08:02, and the clock was already ticking. He walked in like a warlord discovering fire, mistaking the glow of indicator lights for intellect. The walls of the NOC were stacked with displays and dashboards, cables so neatly routed you'd think the place ran on vibes alone. I designed it that way, so no one ever had to look under the floorboards to see what was keeping the house standing. But that was the danger of beauty. He assumed the crown was enough to make him king. That visibility meant control, and that everything important had already been handed to him. The real backbone was never in those screens. It lived in redundant chains of access layered deep under the visible stack. Key stores replicated manually, quorum logic that required time-based coordination and dead switch contingencies that no automation could override. When I said I built this system, I didn't mean I installed software. I meant I wrapped its bones around fail-safes that would outlive any CEO's tenure, let alone the entitled larva of one. In the final weeks, when whispers started circulating that he'd be taking a more hands-on approach, I knew what that really meant: invasion by ignorance. I started noticing tiny cracks, unauthorized policy pushes logged at 2:13 a.m., SSL certs removed and reissued with broken chains of trust, firewall rules rewritten from source IPs that didn't match anyone on our admin sheet. No one in leadership asked why. I did. And when I traced the breadcrumbs, they led back to the Sun's new pet contractor team, modernization consultants with polished shoes and zero institutional memory. One day I found marketing had been granted root. Just for testing, someone said. I just nodded, took the printout, and added it to the binder I kept under my desk. That was the day I renamed the folder Failsafe Stack. I never intended to burn anything down. I just knew that if they lit the match, I wouldn't be the one left choking in the smoke. The protocols I built weren't born out of spite. They were built because I'd been through this before. I'd seen the same movie a decade ago with a different name on the CEO placard. Same plot. Someone thinks they're smarter than the architecture until the lights go out and the boardroom smells like panic and printer toner. The failsafe stack had everything: screenshots, Git history, terminal outputs, a paper trail that couldn't be buried under any power trip. I even included a photo of the sticky note someone taped over the Yups console with "Do not touch, it works" in pink Sharpie. Real professional stuff. But the jewel in the crown was the revocation proof. 2 years ago, I'd slipped a policy into our enterprise orchestration system labeled Failsafe Re-Engagement Protocol, manual only. It was designed for black swan events, true emergencies. All digital escalations were locked out unless you re-authenticated using a physical token, a biometric thumbprint, and a rotating passphrase that only I knew. That policy had just been marked revoked by his new team. They hadn't even read the audit trail before pulling it. I double-checked my logs after I left the building. At 0805, the first warning flag pinged the internal validator. It sent one request, routine, and got back an invalid token. That triggered the countdown confirmation. Failsafe, init tada 020 verified. Tick. They thought I'd given them the keys. But the keys didn't matter when the locks didn't recognize them. Back in my apartment, I set down the drive containing the failsafe stack. I didn't even need to open it. Everything was already in motion. The system was behaving exactly as it should when no valid administrator is detected. For 2 hours, it would pretend nothing changed, until it didn't. In that time, he could reverse the damage, reach out, apologize even. Of course, I knew he wouldn't. People like that don't believe a problem exists until it's their name on the outage report. And even then, they'll blame the weather. So I watched and waited. Phase 1 was complete. Credentials already began expiring in the background, tokens silently marked as floating in the access graph. The deeper scripts weren't flashy. They didn't yell, they just detached. Backup sync stopped. Authentication handshakes started failing silently. The system was dimming the lights behind the scenes, like a stage curtain slowly lowering behind an actor who still thinks they're delivering the final line. I checked the time. 98 minutes remaining, and they still hadn't even noticed. The rack key he pocketed like a trophy? That was theater. A polished little souvenir for the man who thought control came with signage and a laminator. He could have waved it around like a royal scepter for all I cared, because the key didn't unlock anything that mattered. Everything that mattered was already disappearing beneath him. The locks I built were logical, layered, alive. The core systems depended on quorum signatures between subsystems, essentially a kind of digital trust circle that verified itself every few minutes. Remove one node, and the others would ask questions. Remove me, and eventually the quorum fell apart. But that wasn't the only failover. There were heartbeat monitors too, checking for my biometric ping every 48 hours. It didn't announce itself. No email alert, no dashboard flash, just silence. The kind of silence a smart system interprets as a coup. No thumbprint, no continuity, and that morning I'd made sure there'd be no thumbprint. By the time I left the building, I had already tapped in the final confirmation, the last step, the thing that turned protocol into inevitability, the silent heartbeat that signaled the architect has exited. A keystroke, buried behind an encrypted trigger, barely a breath of motion on the outside. But inside, a clock started ticking. Failsafe, init, 02H. That's all it took. A dormant sequence I'd engineered years ago, originally as a test tool for resilience modeling. It had grown over time, become a gatekeeper, something quiet but definitive. The system would operate under the illusion of stability for exactly 120 minutes, enough time to catch and correct a mistake if one was made, enough time for someone to plug the leak, but not enough for panic to become paralysis. If, during those 2 hours, someone failed to authenticate with the matching biometric pattern and the passphrase handshake, both of which rotated every 48 hours on a custom hash curve, the entire stack would begin to cascade. Fail soft first, shut off external API calls, revert cached data blocks, initiate sandbox freezes on high-risk systems. Then fail hard. Purge session memory, wipe the local root tables, revoke all inherited permissions, and finally, turn the lights off. The cascade didn't announce itself with sirens or red banners. It simply began. Quiet as a priest shutting the last door before the storm. And that storm was now exactly 1 hour and 54 minutes away. Back in my apartment, I stood over the kitchen sink, watching the sun reflect off the old lanyard I used to wear. Still had my badge clipped to it. Still had the metal scuff from when it got caught in the server rack back in 17. I didn't miss the place. I missed what it used to be, before it got turned into a showroom for his ego. I logged into the isolated node I kept offline for emergencies and checked the logs. The first signs were already there. 2 failed authentication attempts, neither with a biometric signature. The Quorum algorithm had downgraded trust level from active verified to uncertain pending. Not a drop, not a collapse. But the floor had shifted a fraction of an inch, enough that, if you were really watching, you'd know the earth was about to move. I scrolled through the internal documentation I had written years ago, notes I kept as backup for the future administrator, the one who never came. One line, under the Heartbeat protocol header, still stood out. Purpose: prevent hostile takeover. Trigger: silence. Silence. That was the genius of it. Not revenge, not retribution, just absence. A system built to recognize betrayal not by intrusion, but by omission. Because real threats don't kick down the door. They remove the person who knows how to lock it. I watched the logs tick forward. Another failed override. Still no biometric, 97 minutes, and the boy king had no idea he was about to lose his crown to a heartbeat he couldn't hear. It was like watching a middle schooler give a TED talk on quantum mechanics, with twice the confidence and none of the comprehension. He dressed the part at least, sleeves rolled up just enough to show his watch, jacket folded over a chair like he was too busy revolutionizing the industry to bother wearing it. Around him, investors hovered, sipping their oat milk lattes and nibbling on overpriced croissants he'd had flown in from somewhere Instagrammable. The place smelled like citrus cleaner and desperation. Redesigned from scratch, he beamed, walking them through the no-see like a real estate agent showing off a penthouse he didn't pay for. Streamlined, centralized, beautiful. He kept saying beautiful like that meant something. The walls pulsed with status dashboards I'd built years ago, green across the board at a glance. But if you looked closely, just beneath the superficial sheen, you'd notice one field blinking faintly. Validation pending. He didn't. Or worse, he saw it and thought it was decorative. He ushered them toward the central console, a horseshoe of high-gloss black with embedded touch displays. One screen looped a demo animation of hypothetical threat responses, none of which had ever been tested since his team had bypassed the actual security shell in favor of a sleeker interface. I'd left the shell in place anyway, just rebranded the alert output to match his dashboard template, let him believe it was all his idea. Then came the question, a VC with crow's feet and a voice like he'd seen enough fools to know another when he heard one asked, "What's powering your redundancy?" The room paused. It was the kind of question you didn't ask unless you knew the answer. He didn't. "Oh, we've gone cloud agnostic," the CEO's son replied smoothly, the way you say, "We've diversified our portfolio," when you mean we bought some crypto and hope for the best. Full auto failover across 3 mirror environments, all proprietary scripting. I almost choked on my coffee from 2 zip codes away, because 30 minutes before his little breakfast gala, I'd disabled every failover pathway in the chain. No automation, no mirroring, no switch. It wasn't sabotage, it was protocol. The second the failsafe was initialized, failover had to wait for revalidation. Otherwise, you risked duplicating a compromised config across the entire network. It was a core principle of the architecture, one he'd skimmed over, or more likely, never knew existed. Without a valid override, meaning my biometric and a rotating passphrase known only to the system itself, nothing would switch. The illusion of redundancy was intact, but if something failed, they'd have as much luck fixing it by rubbing two sticks together. One of the junior engineers nodded toward a panel as if to back up his boss's claim. But even he looked nervous. A keen observer would have noticed the edge in his voice. The investors didn't spot it, not yet. But one of them, same guy who asked the question, lingered a second longer, tilted his head toward the main dashboard and narrowed his eyes at the blinking line. Validation pending. He tapped the display, but it didn't react. It was just a status light, one that meant a decision was made but never confirmed. It was like a check engine light in a stolen car, flashing but ignored. Outside the system, the log showed me everything. Internal services were pinging the credential vault, getting back static responses. At that level, everything still looked like uptime. But in truth, the house was already full of gas. The lights were just still on. I could see API calls beginning to queue. The timestamp drift between subsystems had passed the 45-minute mark, not enough to alert anyone yet. But when it crossed 60, the fail-soft mechanism would start whispering to the core services, "Something's not right." That whisper would grow until the system stopped asking for permission and started shutting doors. And there he was, raising a mimosa like he'd cured cancer. "To the future," he said. "May it be as smooth as this launch." They clinked glasses, laughed, took selfies in front of the dashboards I'd built during weekends no one remembers. I checked the countdown, 1 hour and 1 minute remaining, and not a soul in that command center realized they were dining in a building already preparing to go dark. At T-minus 10 minutes, the heartbeat demon did what it was programmed to do. It asked a question. Quietly, without flair. It sent a ping to the credential vault buried beneath 5 layers of logic, each one designed to recognize one thing: the architect's touch. No key, no thumbprint, no override. The silence that came back was louder than any alarm. Immediately, the protocol kicked into phase 2. The central logs, millions of entries, real-time analytics, API telemetry, all the transactional memory that kept operations humming, began to duplicate themselves to cold storage. Not a cloud bucket, not some convenient SaaS endpoint, but physical drives in a vault location no one had been granted access to since before the last audit cycle. I'd said it that way on purpose. Paranoia is a lazy word for someone who simply understands the shelf life of trust. As the duplication ran, a second process began wiping the logs from the live system. No pop-up, no dramatic warning, just absence. The kind of absence you don't notice until someone says, "Hey, where'd that go?" Only no one said anything. Not yet. Instead, the dashboards began to hang. Slowly, at first. Query latency hit a wall. Some graphs stuttered. A few sessions dropped back into diagnostic mode. Basic CLI windows that blinked once, then blacked out. Engineers thought it was a glitch, a memory leak, a little hiccup from the animation stack maybe. Someone probably joked about needing to reboot the render server. They had no idea what they were watching was a lock loop, silent, recursive, uninterruptible. 7 minutes to blackout. On the 3rd floor, a product manager called in to say their reporting panel wasn't refreshing. The help desk flagged it. Tier 1 routed the ticket to Tier 2. Tier 2 was already busy trying to figure out why the backend cluster hadn't answered a health check in 8 minutes. No alerts had gone out. Because the alert system, it was one of the first to go. 4 minutes. The root vault entered validation mode. This was the final threshold. No more soft warnings, no more delays. The system began requesting confirmation from every tier of its chain of trust, and each one returned the same answer. Null, null, null. 2 minutes. That's when the speakers chimed. 3 crisp tones, neutral, emotionless. System validation expired, authority not recognized. Please contact system architect. I don't know what his face looked like in that moment, but I'd bet good money his first thought was, who's the system architect? Not a name he ever bothered learning. Maybe he thought it was the vendor who printed the dashboards. Maybe he thought it was someone on his consultant team, the same team that had recommended stripping out legacy bloatware like biometric locking. Maybe he thought it was him. It wasn't. At that exact moment, the internal console registered the final escalation. Failsafe Protocol 112C triggered. Lack of validation. Initiating hard reboot. No klaxons, no flashing red lights, just a gentle draining of power, like a tide pulling back before the tsunami. The investor who'd asked about redundancy was still in the room. He stood frozen, watching one terminal after another go black. One engineer called out, "I think we lost routing." Another answered, "No, we lost everything." The lights were still on, sure, the HVAC still hummed, but the soul of the system, gone. Pulled inward into a vault they didn't even know existed, and from my apartment I watched it all, quietly, without joy. This wasn't revenge, it was design. At 10:02 a.m. sharp, everything just died. Not a flicker, not a dramatic crash. Every screen in that pristine, overpriced command center, 56 flat panels, a dozen dashboards, 3 projectors, all went black at the same time, like someone had snapped their fingers and sucked the oxygen out of the room. No warning, no error codes, no spinning wheels of doom, just silence. He stood there, mouth open, one hand still holding a half-full mimosa, staring at the main wall like it had personally betrayed him. The color drained from his face slower than the data had disappeared from their systems. He started shouting, "Restart the servers! Reboot the dashboards! Who authorized this?" But no one answered, because no one knew. Not the contractors he brought in, not the engineers he'd sidelined for not being agile enough, and definitely not the junior analyst now shaking so hard. His badge lanyard clicked against his belt buckle. Someone tried to dial out, internal line, no tone. They tried Slack, dead. Then a cell phone, still no signal. Routing was down. Completely. The room that had been so full of buzz and ego and filtered sunlight 30 minutes earlier now felt like a tomb. Even the fans in the server racks had gone still. Then, without any fanfare, the main screen blinked once and lit up with a new message. "Please enter validation credentials." Below that, "Time expired. Full system offline. Data preserved in escrow." He turned to the engineer nearest him and shouted, "Fix it now!" But the guy just stared. Pale, confused. "What escrow? What does that mean?" A woman from infrastructure whispered, "Where are the rack logs?" No one answered, because none of them even knew where the racks lived. Not really. They knew the display rooms, the surface panels, the cleaned-up UI with toggles and sliders he'd demanded from day one. But the logs, the real logs, were buried in a subnet no one had accessed in months. A node built into a legacy rack 2 floors underground, behind a locked door that required 3 approvals to even see. And guess who had been the only person authorized to sign off on those approvals? He pointed at a keyboard. "Try the emergency code." Someone typed in a string. The system rejected it with a soft tone. Invalid. Another tried a backup credential, an override someone swore used to work. Invalid. Panic set in. They started moving faster, clicking, tapping, rebooting dumb terminals like they were playing whack-a-mole with a ghost. Nothing changed. I watched the feeds from my apartment. The silent audit node, still synced to core telemetry, showed everything. The chaos, the desperate packet floods, the failed authentications, the final escalation, a hard sandbox lock on every active service. One screen in the back of the room, one that hadn't been updated yet to the new UI, still showed the last log entry before it shut down. Failsafe Protocol 112C. Execution complete. Beneath that, in smaller text, data escrow assigned to Vault 6B. Retrieval requires architect key or board authorization. The irony? The vault was in their own building, sub-basement, fireproof, offline, and I was the only person who could open it without triggering a wipe. He screamed again, something about lawsuits, breach of contract, brand damage, but the only sound that followed was the hum of panic settling over everyone else. They had everything, on paper, the building, the command center, the team, the funding. What they didn't have was the one thing that mattered, me. I leaned back in my chair, took a sip of coffee, and waited, because eventually the call would come. It always does. When I stepped through the security gate, no one stopped me. The badge scanner had been shut down since the blackout, but one of the guards recognized me and opened the door without a word. I didn't say thank you, not out of arrogance. Just focus. You don't thank someone for moving aside when the fire's already halfway through the building. The place was quiet in a way that felt wrong. The hum was gone. No whir of servers, no keystrokes, no hushed chaos of people pretending to understand a system they'd broken. Just dead air and carpet that still smelled faintly of catered eggs and burnt pride. At the center of it all, standing in the room like a man staring at the wreckage of something he once loved, was the CEO, not the son, the father. He didn't turn when I walked in, just kept his eyes on the largest screen, still displaying the same message in pale gray text: validation expired, data preserved in escrow. I stopped beside him. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, he spoke. "You built it." It wasn't a question, just a statement, like acknowledging gravity. I nodded once. "Can you fix it?" Another pause. "I can." He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way you don't fix with vacation. The kind of tired that comes from realizing, too late, that you trusted the wrong thing for the wrong reasons. "But there's an escrow clause," he said slowly, "in your contract." Now he looked at me, eyes steady, not defensive, not even apologetic, just resigned. It says, reactivation requires either your written approval or a full forensic rebuild, which the legal team says would take 6 months, minimum. I didn't nod this time. I let the silence speak, let the weight of that clause settle in the air like smoke. He knew what it meant. He'd signed it. 2 years ago, when I'd rewritten the architecture standards and included the sovereign system clause, an embedded protocol to prevent emergency takeovers without proper chain of command validation. No override, no temporary admin privileges, no executive backdoor. The system would not respond to anyone except me, or the full board, acting as a quorum, in writing, with formal documentation and public record. I added that clause after a near miss during the last merger attempt. No one had argued it at the time. In fact, he'd praised it. "You were protecting the structure," he'd said. Now the structure had done exactly what it was built to do. It had refused to be hijacked. He ran a hand through his hair. It trembled slightly, not from fear, from restraint. "What would you need?" he asked. I let that question hang in the air too. Not because I didn't know the answer. I did. I'd known it since the moment they walked me out. But I wanted him to feel it, the reversal. Not as punishment, but as correction. There's a difference. Down the hall, I could hear the muffled static of engineers arguing quietly. No one knew what to do. No one had the keys, not the digital ones, not the structural ones. They'd built their little empire on top of a vault without asking what was underneath. He looked at me again. "Well?" I tilted my head slightly. "That depends," I said. "Do you want to restore operations or just bring the lights back on?" He didn't flinch, just exhaled through his nose and nodded slowly. "I want to fix this." I believed him, but it wasn't his belief that mattered anymore. It was mine. The room smelled like paper and tension. Boardrooms always do when the old guard realizes the cleanup crew knows more about the foundation than the architect ever did. 12 of them, seated around a table that cost more than most of my college tuition. All of them silent, some ashamed, some just calculating. Only one chair at the end sat empty. The CEO's son. Not invited to this meeting. Not yet. I spoke without raising my voice. "My position is reinstated, effective immediately." No pushback, just pens hovering over notepads. "I report only to the board," I continued. No dotted lines, no lateral escalation, no exceptions. Still no interruption, just the soft tap of the general counsel writing faster. Operational protocols may not be modified, suspended, or overridden without a dual signature from both myself and the board's chair. Not the CEO, not the CIO, not a consultant. A few glances exchanged. I let them settle. The CEO's son is to be granted 0 system privileges until he completes training, certification, and full comprehension of the protocols he attempted to manage. He is not to receive shadow access or visibility into administrative tiers until signed off by me personally. A longer pause followed that one. The CFO opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. Wisely, I moved on. Emergency key rotations must be authorized in person by a quorum, not via email, not over Zoom. In the room, logged, verified, physically stamped. If that slows them down, good. The system is designed to be cautious, not convenient. At the end of the list, I tapped the folder I'd placed on the table, and the fail-safe stack remains intact, untouched. Its logic, its failover rules, and its self-correction protocols are not to be reconfigured, redeployed, or stripped out under any future modernization effort. Silence followed. Not the tense kind. The kind where everyone knows that they're not just signing off on a reinstatement. They're admitting they put the entire company on the edge of collapse because they mistook polish for architecture. The CEO sat with his fingers steepled under his chin. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He just exhaled. Agreed. One by one, heads nodded, some reluctantly, some like they were finally exhaling after 2 hours of holding their breath. Then the board chair spoke. "One more thing," she said, her voice level. "Once we finalize this, we'd like your signature on the authority logs." She reached into a binder and pulled out a printed page, an old procedural requirement that had long been replaced by digital audit trails but never officially retired. "Publicly," she added. "I understood." It wasn't just reinstatement, it was reclamation, visibility. The system couldn't just be architecturally sound, it needed to be seen as such, and seen as mine. She slid the page across the table with a pen. "I'll sign after we meet with him," I said. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "The son?" I nodded. "He needs to hear it." The chair leaned back, thought for a moment, then looked at the CEO. He didn't say a word, just gestured to his assistant. "Bring him in." He sat stiff-backed in the chair, trying not to look like he was breaking. But the sheen of sweat on his temple gave him away. His hands rested on the table, palms flat, fingers curled slightly, like he was resisting the urge to grip something, anything. Across from him sat the board, stone-faced. Above him, the display screen blinked. System locked, awaiting authorization. The reboot script sat between us. Simple in its logic, complex in its meaning. It was 5 lines long, no fluff, no UI, just commands, each one a trigger that would reawaken the system in precisely the order it was built. If you knew how to read it. He didn't. The board chair turned to me. "Will you reauthorize operations?" I nodded once, but I didn't pick up the pen yet. Instead, I slid the script toward him, slowly, not as a taunt, as a mirror. "Read this line out loud." He glanced down, then back up at me, uncertain. I said nothing, just waited. He took a breath, squinted at the line. "Init. Credential. Secure." His voice faltered. He tried again, tripped on the syntax. "Why? Does it call a failsafe validation on line 2 before the master key?" He stopped, looked up. That was the moment he realized he'd been sitting in the cockpit of a jet he couldn't fly, pressing buttons, turning knobs, never asking what any of them did. I picked up the pen, signed the line, then reached into my jacket and entered the final key. The system paused, then blinked once, and came back to life. One by one, lights reappeared on the dashboard. Routing resumed, internal services realigned, external comms reestablished. A hum filled the room, not of panic this time, but electricity. The system, sleeping for 2 hours, was awake, operational, stable, unmistakably mine. I stood. The room remained silent. I didn't need applause, and I certainly wasn't staying for a victory lap. As I turned toward the door, I glanced over my shoulder at him, still seated, still staring, now at a screen full of commands he didn't understand on a system that no longer belonged to his ego. "You still have 2 hours," I said softly. "Use them better next time." He said nothing. Just sat there, jaw clenched, the glow of the reboot screen casting shadows under his eyes. I stepped out of the boardroom as the logs refreshed and the countdown began, not toward collapse, but toward control. Behind me, the light flickered back across the command center. And in the center of it all, a young man finally understood what it meant to inherit a system built on more than confidence. The system ticked up, and the lesson stayed burned in.